Hey, is this thing on? Okay, welcome to What Library, everyone. Thanks for being here with me. This is my personal journey to discover where the library is. My name is Nate Jacobs, and I'm going to be interviewing librarians, scholarly communications experts, researchers, people that are working on open access policy, people that are building new libraries, people that are doing very library-like things but don't yet know that they are indeed librarians or soon-to-be librarians. And so, yeah, we're going to get into it all. We're going to try to just have some really simple, direct, frank conversations about some of the deeper issues going on in scholarly communications, and just try to, really have a lot of genuine conversations and try to figure out what's happening right now and where everything is headed. So our first guest on the podcast is Ashley Farley. I'm really excited about this. She is the Program Officer of Knowledge and Research Services at the Gates Foundation. So she's just an amazing person all around. She has been really important in my kind of entry into the world of scholarly communication, in figuring out what's going on in the world, and also kind of being a thought leader for kind of where we're headed and how we can navigate all the thorny issues that have come up and will continue to come up in this space. So she has done everything from the beginning of her career. She worked at a small library teaching, grandmothers how to use email and computers, all the way up to now she, is helping craft open access policies for one of the largest private funders of science in the world. So really excited to get this kicked off in a second here. So first, a quick word about our sponsor for today. Today's episode is sponsored by Elsevier, a Belgian company. They have been publishing and paywalling scientific articles for over 100 years. They are the trusted name in academic publishing, with an ironclad guarantee to charge you what they can to keep your next article on their secure, heavily protected private servers. Pay to publish or pay to read, oftentimes both. They're here to carefully guide you on your months-long journey to keep publicly funded research results on corporate servers. Elsevier, a Belgian company. And now, without further ado, my conversation with Ashley Farley. Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
It's all right. How are you?
Good. Okay, so were you able to get that voice memo thing, or?
Let me see. I think so. I think it's probably already on here. Yes.
Yeah. And then I did realize that I could, I didn't quite figure out how to do the, like a video record thing, but I realized I could just screen capture my whole screen. I don't have to do that if you don't want me to, but I was going to do it just in case something weird happened.
It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't care.
Okay.
I've seen myself on recorded videos and been like, yeah, I should try a little harder, but
yeah.
not.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, but you were able to, and then, so it's a little bit weird, but I figured, I was reading some stuff online, and I kind of figured if you wrap it in like a little, it's kind of like, the micro, perfect, yeah.
My Grogu tea towel.
Nice. Nice. You can just wrap that puppy up, and then it's like,
Okay.
I think it like cancels out the like high frequency, like little like movements and stuff, so, yeah.
That makes sense. And yeah, there's always, as much as I'll try to have no background noise,
Yeah.
life.
Well, yeah, I want to hear some barkings. I want to hear about your dogs, too, so.
Yeah. Well, yeah, speaking of which, I imagine, people so we don't have kids, and our dog last night was, like, sick from, 3:30 in the morning on, so, like, we got very little sleep, but I think he's doing better now.
What is it like when a dog gets sick? I've never really had dogs before. Is it like vomiting and stuff, or just like whining?
No,
or?
I think he actually pulled a muscle, so he was just like couldn't settle down anywhere, and just like his little groans, like you can tell he's like, ugh, this sucks. And I'm like, buddy, I don't know what to do for you. Like I can't really tell what hurts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he finally. I mean, he's 13, 14, so he's he's getting up there, and
Yeah.
So it's hard when they can't communicate what's wrong.
Yeah. He's an old man. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. So when my kids come into the bed in the middle of the night, when they're not sick, they just kind of do this all the time. They always go to my partner. But this morning, Declan, he came on for some reason at some point in the middle, and he was like, "Oh no, I want to go like onto Daddy's side," and so he came over to Daddy's side, and it was just like. I don't know how she does it, because like he was kicking me.
Yes.
He at one point decided to inspect my lip and was just like, it like started with a finger, and then at some point he was just like, I was like, what is going on right now? I'm trying to sleep. So anyway.
Okay, yeah. So it's always interesting to get a peek into that life where I'm like, man, I don't think I have the patience, the stamina.
Yeah. Okay, so anyways, I am really excited that you agreed to be the first guest on whatever this ends up being, something, nothing. We'll see, I guess. Yeah, like for me, just kind of like winding back the clock, when I was first getting involved in scholarly communication and realizing I wanted to take this like crazy left turn away from being a scientist and into the world of meta research and doing something about the the infrastructure around science. You were kind of one of those early voices. I think I started following you on Twitter or something before it, turned into the hellscape that it is now. And so, anyways, and over the years, I basically when crazy shit happens, I'm like, oh, like I'll email you, and it's like, oh my god, like what is going on? Like what is this? And so, basically, what I'm hoping this turns into is just like a series of venting sessions that can like lead us to just some like kind of blue sky thinking on a few things. So I guess maybe to start off with, it would be interesting to hear what brought you into scholarly communication, like kind of what was your journey into this wonderful space?
Oh, definitely, and what a journey it's been. When I was a wee one, I really wanted to become a veterinarian. Like that was my dream. So I tried really hard to get a biology degree and enough of the prerequisites to get into vet school. And I suck at math, so I basically kind of failed out of that program. While I had secured like a first public library job, which was in a very small town in Philomath, Oregon. So I was going to Corvallis at the time because they have a great vet school.
Wait, sorry. So you filled out of like that was after undergraduate or in graduate?
No, it was undergraduate. It was undergraduate. Yeah.
Okay.
So undergraduate. But I even started earlier than that. I went to the first part of my undergrad to Valparaiso University in Valparaiso, Indiana. Never been to the Midwest before. It was where my mom really wanted me to go to college. And I ended up getting a student position in the library. So that was my like first introduction to libraries, academic research, all of that very kind of basic stuff. And then I transferred my senior year of my undergrad, which I don't recommend doing because you lose a lot of credits that way. It took me almost 6 years to finish my undergrad.
Oh man.
But I had at least some library experience that I was able to get actually a really good small librarian job for public libraries. So first time working at a public library, and that was the hub of the community because it was so small. Even though it was 10 minute drive to a major city, a lot of the patrons had never really left, and it was a very small logging town. Like they knew where I lived, and they'd show up to my house to like renew books when the library was closed. So it was like that very small town.
You were like the town doctor, kind of like everybody.
Yeah,
it was so cool.
It was bizarre and amazing at the same time, and I really enjoyed that. And I remember at the time trying to just. People needed access to information and of all sorts across the board.
So what year was that? Not to date you, but just so we have an idea of like what the digital.
Like 2009, yeah.
2009,
yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting, because one of the I don't even really know how to wrap my head around this, but there's just like this interplay of like digital versus physical, and like because part of like what has happened over the last like 50 years is like we've transformed into like digital, but like there is like but library, the term library is still very like connected with this idea of like physically going in and physically and like that experience and like how should that be recreated digitally, but like so it's actually really cool that you had just like a really you had that full experience of like that physical like needing to physically enter and physically read books.
Yes, and I also yes, speaking to the digital, like that was when things really started going fully digital, and specific generations were already being cut out. Like I used to offer like just one-on-one teaching sessions. It was like my program idea, and so people could sign up, and I helped this woman for about a month. She'd come in like once or twice a week just in how to use email, because she was going to lose her job if she didn't use email.
Oh, wow.
It was at a point where, in a small enterprise, that she just didn't think she needed to use email or didn't know how to, and tried to do work anyways. And it got to the point where like they put her on like probation. And
oh my God.
I taught her how to use email. And we see that, that kind of is a theme throughout all my experiences with public libraries, because when job applications went pretty much solely online, a lot of people didn't have the skills to be able to apply to jobs, and that's a big problem.
That's so crazy. I love this. I haven't. I was always more on the science side, so I don't have this like depth of experience on the library side. So I love, but it's like it's just so interesting, because it's like there's this concept of like libraries being like a catch-all. It's almost like a church or something, where it's like, we will come to us and we will help you. Like, it's almost this deeply philanthropic, and it's like, that has nothing to do with, like, teaching somebody how to use email has nothing to do with what a library is supposed to be, but it's like, like, let's do that. Like, it's just like this catch-all to, like, help people connect in with,
And when we talk about, impact of the work that we do, I mean, those are the kind of things that, I mean, that was, 15 years ago, and I still remember her and that interaction to this day, because it made such a big impact. Or one of the things I love doing for people and kind of offered as a service within the library was working on their resumes, because I find that really fun and interesting, and it's such a huge impact, because people would then be able to be in better positions to get jobs where writing a resume was a barrier, but not, they were doing more technical jobs or labor jobs. So I found that really interesting, and, people trying to get access to health information, things like that. And
you mentioned that when things started transitioning into the digital, that sort of like hit certain demographics more than others. Was that what you started with? So was there other, like, did you see like differences in who is like physically walking in versus people like, who was just using the computer, like using computers to access information?
Yeah, I think, we definitely had the younger generations, or kids after school would come and were very comfortable with technology and learning from a young age. And then you had, definitely if English isn't a first language, that's kind of a barrier, and I think technology can be a little more intimidating. And then older generations that just, they're encountering computers for the first time. It was just really fascinating to see, because there's a lack of comfortability there, where you can pick a book off of a shelf and it's not like a scary, you can't break it, it's not a scary artifact. Like they know how to use the traditional table of contents indexes and stuff that nowadays still has to be taught to younger generations that are just used to putting in a search string in Google and expecting all the information they could possibly want.
Yeah.
The idea of like watching YouTube videos to learn anything was also just, the number of times you're like, have you tried Googling it? And it's just not even a concept. Yeah.
Okay, so that was sort of your first real experience.
Yeah.
So that was your small town library job, and then what was the next step after that?
I moved to Seattle, and that was a massive change. I never lived in a big city like that before, still there, now. And I ended up having both a Seattle Public Library job, which I could tell you stories for days on that experience.
Because, the types of,
Okay. Yeah, well, and because at this point I was, still considered a paraprofessional, so I hadn't gone to graduate school. I'm not official librarian, so I'm in these kind of entry-level paraprofessional library jobs. I was, one of the only women that ever had a role as a public service technician at Seattle Public Library. So really working with just the computers, because that was kind of my sweet spot for being able to help people use job resources, download books, all kind of the digital side that was really emerging. And then I also
even early on you kind of gravitated toward that intersection between technology and library.
Yeah.
Okay.
hey, my first ever job was at Best Buy, so
Yeah.
I was primed for the technology world. So I think to me that made the most sense. I mean, it's really interesting to see how things like I remember getting like little audiobooks in these little like containers that you just put a battery in and you would plug into headphones, and then to see now that you can just download things, it's shifted so quickly, and I do think that's fascinating, and would like to think that it would have led to more availability, but it hasn't. But so definitely focusing on the digital inclusion, the digital space, and then I wasn't able to get a full-time job at the Seattle Public Library, so I ended up going over to the academic world at University of Washington and working in their media center.
Okay.
And that's when I started going to grad school. And it was interesting because, grad school, I mean, I feel like I had already had a lot of experience working in both types of libraries. I was trying to focus a bit more on data management was where I wanted to go. Never really heard anything about scholarly communications, no utterance of open access. Like it just wasn't a part of our curriculum, and it wasn't until I had a research gig that ended up being connected to the Gates Foundation that I met their head librarian, who later became my boss, and I ended up having an internship there, and the internship was all about kicking off the 2015 iteration of the open access policy at the Gates Foundation, and that was the first time that I heard about open access. It just made sense because what I think is most interesting in becoming a librarian is you're taught a lot about collection development, and we think very deeply about what we include in our collections, how we source it, what the needs of our communities are, but there's very little question of kind of, and it's just changed a lot since then. So this again is back in 2011 time. Little like question of why are we doing this, and who and what is this for? If I'm buying these big subscriptions for our academic community, like why? And there's just no, because I was missing that piece until I was learning about the policy and the push for open access and all the original stuff for the movement, and I was like, a light bulb kind of clicked on, and I'm like, well, this is insanity. If I explained this system to anyone else, they would be like, why does anyone allow that to happen?
So who are the initial kind of like sources of material or inspiration or like people that really pulled you into that world, like when you were just like your eyes were opening up to it? I mean, I'm still hanging on to it, but you mentioned earlier like Twitter community, and that was such a huge one. So getting involved early on in OpenCon, of course, like Peter Suber and his work early on, following the Budapest initiative. So those really early things led by Spark, and that really pulled me into kind of the world and people that I still work with today, like Joe MacArthur is a big one with the open access button and the work that we've done with OA Works, and Aaron McKieran, and a lot of people from the OpenCon community. Just a quick tangent. Wait, so you're still in the Twitter world? Because I couldn't take it and left, and I don't know, but could you just give me a quick what? Is there still a lot of conversations happening there? Is it?
I think so. I mean, I have been using it less, which I think was needed and good overall, because I could you can get sucked into it,
it's addicting
very easily. But I haven't really tried anything else. I tried Mastodon. I just mirror my Twitter feed, but I'm still finding what I find most useful is so much of the think pieces that are posted around scholarly communications, not necessarily research articles that I would find in another, I guess RSS feed. I don't know. But from in blogs I don't necessarily follow, but seeing people in this space like, hey, I'm irritated about peer review, so I wrote this thing on their blog, and then I'm like, oh, this is great. So those are the things I'm still seeing a lot of. I'm still really fascinated by threads, critiquing the publishing process, critiquing the peer review process, and I think those are valuable to see. I don't know if the advocacy is as robust as it was before,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if that's necessarily what I need much anymore, because we do have those, different circles.
Yeah. I'm just like very lonely sitting on Threads, that the Facebook one. There's nobody. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening over there, but it's like your Instagram now, where like there's nothing like in terms of like who you're talking about. This is explosive like place for conversations and pulling in. It's just not there.
It's still, yeah. I mean, if he paywalls it completely, like I won't pay for it, but for me, it's held up fairly well, and I love the variety. So I can get, like the scholarly communications. I can get I love horror movie stuff, and I can get the random, TikTok videos that people are pulling from TikTok because I'm too old to use TikTok myself.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So I feel like I can still stay on the cutting edge of what's culturally relevant without having to do a lot of work or join 80 different apps.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible, and hopefully this happens. I mean, maybe like Elon is like a hurricane, and it's just like gonna go away, and then you're gonna have to rebuild a bunch of stuff after the hurricane leaves. But I don't know. It's possible it'll just kind of, I don't know. Maybe that's being optimistic, but
no. I mean, I have a similar feeling. Just as long as enough people don't jump, because otherwise, I don't think it's, for me, I haven't seen enough changes. Like, you mute what you don't want to see, and I do think the algorithm adjusts to that. So, I don't really, I see a lot of people complaining about a bunch of bot followers. I'm not popular enough to have that, so...
Yeah. It really depends on the community, yeah. Like, if you're not really in politics and your network is, niche enough, like, Scholarcom is niche enough where it's like, is somebody going to pay a Russian bot farm to, I mean, I guess, Elizabeth Bick had to deal with that a little bit. That was, this hot and rod issue, but, for the most part, we're kind of shielded from, bots just because it's, niche enough. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, sorry. That was a total tangent.
So we'll see. No, but it's an important one.
Yeah. So following chronologically, so you're now...
There they are.
Oh, okay, hold on, we gotta pause everything. What are your dogs' names? Who are the dogs? Can you introduce them?
Oh, Addison is the older dog.
Okay.
Zeke is the younger dog. Zeke is a Alaskan Clay Kai mini husky.
Okay.
He's very cute.
Wait, so who was the one that was injured?
That's my older one.
Okay.
He's a feral dog that we adopted 12 years ago.
Okay.
And he's a head case, but we love him. We love him.
He's the crazy uncle in the family.
Yeah, we finally did a DNA test on him a couple years ago, and he's Beagle and Lakeshore Terrier.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But yeah, so they love this work from home life, though, so I apologize for the barking.
I feel like, I have fully committed to the work from home. I've got I finally have a desk. It took me I think a year and a half or maybe 2 years into the pandemic, but I finally got a nice desk. I don't know if I could do. How often are you going into the office? Are you mostly work from home?
I mean, cut this part out, but we're supposed to be going in 50% per week. Maybe once or twice a month. Okay. But I started traveling again for work, so that counts towards it. But I'm just so much more productive and happier at home. I try to go in for team events when we have them, but my work's pretty isolated. It's either across the entire foundation, or, so then it's going into the office doesn't mean anything, or it's, really isolated to just what I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the chronological. Okay, so you're now at the Gates Foundation.
Yes.
You're starting to really get opened up to this world of open access policy. Okay, so can you just kind of talk us through the early year or two and just take us from there? So this is the Gates Foundation's first OA policy, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So first OA policy, 2015. So we're a little bit behind in the policy space for big funders, but not totally left behind. If you look kind of a timeline of major funder policies, I think it was good timing, because we kind of had seen the NIH initial public access policy, Wellcome Trust policy. So there's definitely, and we work pretty close with Wellcome Trust, so there's a push for other funders that this is something that's important and something that we should be doing and paying attention to. I think it aligns really well with our our missions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was really interesting at the beginning because there wasn't any open access options for, the highly prestigious journals. So getting leadership buy-in and really support for putting out a policy, we're essentially saying that, the top journals aren't compliant, that our grantees can't publish in them, was tough. It was tough getting people on board. And I still think, we've spent, I'm already looking at our 2025 policy, so I'm saying a decade of policy, and we've learned a lot over that decade, and attitudes have changed, but not as quickly as I would like.
Can you dig into that dynamic a bit? Because I think one of the central themes that keeps coming up is who should lead and who should follow and who's responsible. And it's this weird triangle trifecta dilemma. So from your perspective, from the funder, trying to set policy that is trying to inspire, lead, guide, require researcher behavior. What is that dynamic like? Because obviously you can't just dictate, right? Because you do have a lot of power as a funder, but there's pushback. Yeah. So can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, and I should say there's important distinctions between we were a private funder, so is Wellcome Trust. So
you have more flexibility
way more flexibility than a national funder or a funder United States NIH. This fund has taxpayer dollars, so there's certain other bureaucracy hoops to jump through when making changes in policies, and I think there needs to be more of a community consensus and comfortability there, whereas for private funders, if you don't want to take our funding and agree to our terms and conditions, then you're welcome not to take that funding. But we don't have to necessarily be more flexible as that, and I actually think the harder stance we take on that, the actually more equitable we would become, because if you look at kind of where our top funding is going and who wants to really publish in those top journals, it's already going to be privileged institutions that have always had the ability to have enough money and funding and resources to publish in those journals. So if we actually change that, I think that's really impactful as far as trying to change the system to be more equitable. But it's, what I find interesting and wish we had more conversations around, because when I am seeing think pieces or things on social media, it's well, the funders should just do this, and it's who do you think funders are? And it's basically a lot of the funder community is just academia adjacent, so we've come from academia. They've had to go through all of that process, but they're just no longer. It's almost like leaving, I feel to go to industry, but you go to the private funding world instead. But you carry all those biases with you, and so a lot of our program staff have been trained to think that we need to publish in those journals. We need to make sure our grantees are able to grow their careers, and the whole promotion incentive system that is just continually an obstacle. But I do think funders, it's an important signal. I do think policy is very important, having policy with some teeth and proper compliance support is really important. But when you think about it, at the end of the day, funder policy is only affecting those papers that are, part of that funding, which is really a drop in the bucket of the millions of papers published per year. When you're talking about we may be published now up to 5,000 per year, but the NIH, the OSTP memo, that might change a lot, but we don't have enough collective action of funders to actually make a dent in how much is being published.
And you mean and where it's being published, or
how, or if it's most of what's being published isn't associated with an open access mandate.
Okay.
So unless the researchers are willing to put out the money or really believe in open access or use other means, I should say it doesn't have to be just paid open access, those things aren't being made open access necessarily.
So what was the original kind of 2015 sort of structure and then how did that evolve? And maybe even you can even indicate if you're allowed to where you're headed for 2025. It's just kind of what has the requirements kind of been, or what does the structure look like, and kind of what has the strategy been to slowly ratchet towards some sort of longer term vision?
Yeah, so originally it was just, pay for open access. So if there's an open access option, we paid it. That was pretty much, I think, at that time what we thought was really the only version available, and there was a real emphasis on the version of record at the journal that's been peer reviewed and how important peer review is, which I'm not saying it's not, but I think over the years and our iterations of the policy, we are definitely seeing that we're almost like open access and peer review, but at what cost? Like, what is it really benefiting the research community? So we had a few years of that policy, which overall, despite the few obstacles around, we don't publish a ton in those top journals. So we managed that, mitigated that, still remember that a lot of our grantees aren't in academia, that just want to be able to get information out to their communities, to be able to share that information more easily. We then joined Plan S in 2018, so we basically had about, that took effect in January 1st, 2021, so at that time we had almost, a little over 5 years of that policy transitioned into Plan S, which I think it was good that we shifted, what we considered a compliant version of the record or artifact or article. So, we really integrated. We were very much a part of the rights retention strategy work and trying to push for the sharing of the author-accepted manuscript. So we're saying, hey, we don't necessarily need the typesetting or journal brand. Discovery and access of kind of the green open access is improved. It's still been through peer review, so that's good. So this is the thing that we're going to try to make available more broadly, and try not to pay the APCs, try not to do any of that. So that was, I think, interesting to have at least a different route that wasn't just pay for open access.
Yeah.
And then we stopped paying for hybrid journal publications, which, to be completely honest, is a nightmare because researchers don't know what a hybrid journal is. No hybrid journals market themselves as such.
Yeah.
Of course, the publishers have not been very willing and able to communicate the policy. The policy's pretty confusing unless you live and breathe in this space. So it's been a lot of work to try to help our grantees understand their options, and I think also really communicate the why. Like, I get really worried that open access policies are then just viewed as a hindrance, and they're this annoying thing we have to do because our funders say so. And I really want, researchers and program staff to view an open access policy as part of how we work and critical to our missions and goals, and be excited about it. So in viewing all of that and knowing all of this, and a really interesting component that I've been talking through program staff more is, we are publishing more than ever because we're giving more grants than ever, more work is coming out. So the volume of publishing itself is going up, but we're being asked to pick up the bill less. So there's other means of open access, other people are paying for it, but we are also paying more than we've ever paid. And what we're actually...
volume, okay.
No, just because of cost increase. So,
okay.
And paying for Nature Cell, those are all double digit, tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And so we, even though we're publishing more, we're picking up the bill less, but we're still paying more than ever. So we're taking all this information in and looking at, I really want a more equitable policy. I also want a policy that positively affects the whole external community, not just Gates funded researchers. And I think that's really important. So we are looking at having...
Yeah, so I love it. So that was going to be my next question, was about what are we paying for with the APCs? And I think a big kind of question in my mind is just untangling the thread or the knot of services and the value proposition of this transaction that researchers give when they're publishing in these whether it's for profit or not profit, these whether it's subscription or APC, what is that value transfer? And I think for me, what has been really fundamental with the success of preprints is that it very almost like a knife, like a surgeon's knife, separated between inserting something into the scholarly record, like access to manuscript, and this whole prestige promotion thing. And so, yeah, it was really frustrating for me, like that wasn't disentangling sooner. And so the preprints really helped, and it's nice actually. It's really exciting to hear that that is now firmly being embedded in some of these OA policies, where it's like, okay, as a researcher, and for me, this was, I used to get really riled up about like the APCs and subscriptions, just getting really like angry about it. And for me, a really important step was to realize that it's not, there's two things there, right? There's one is the scholarly communication, which is an academic exercise. That's the preprint, that's getting it so that people can see it. It's publicly accessible. There's no like barriers there. There's no login wall. There's no paywall. There's nothing. It can be peer reviewed. It can be interacted with. There's discussions around it. And then a separate step is this promotional step. It's like, I want to get it in the magazine. I want it to be on, our version of like the front page of the New York Times. And that's okay. Like you can, if you want to pay $10,000 to get it on the cover of a magazine, like you don't have to be angry about that. Like as long as we are also like really protecting this academic,
actually paying attention to the research.
The academic regard. So for me, I've actually chilled out a lot. I used to be like, the angry Twitter guy, like, which I also, that's how I learn, which is very unfortunate. I get angry about something and then people correct me and then I learn a bunch. So that's my own idiosyncrasy.
Hey, at least you're open to being corrected. I mean, that's important.
So that's kind of really cool. So that's the next question. So it sounds like you guys are already like really moving in that direction, which is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, that part makes me think your shirt saying journals aren't real. It's almost, that's kind of where I feel like we're at this point of like, I don't think we can take really any other direction but this one. And I think it's really important. It's a natural progression. And it's going to be hard. I mean, we've had a lot of concerns that if we stop paying APCs completely, that puts LMIC authors at a disadvantage. But I feel like getting Gates funding is already a bit of a privilege, and if we further keep these APCs and help LMIC authors, publish more in these expensive. Oh wait, sorry, I'm confused.
Can you just remind me again? What's LMIC? What is that?
Oh, sorry, lower middle income.
Oh, okay.
Countries, yeah, and actually, that's a whole separate topic, is trying to find better terminology to talk about, maybe more poor researchers, and It's a fascinating topic to follow, and that's one thing I do find still of great value on Twitter is following those researchers and learning from them. So can definitely share some articles later that I found really helpful in that. But I'm still kind of using that terminology because the foundation is as well. Yeah. But anyway, and I'm glad that
just to pause it there, just to go a little bit slower here. So to take the opposite argument that I just had, which is like, okay, like, nature and science, this is all, it's in some senses, it's like the transaction is paying for promotion. If you pendulum swing that to the other extreme where it's like, we're not going to support that at all, is the idea that like, especially if you can't afford to then pay for those promotional services, it's like, you're now, in terms of attention and career advancement, you're competing against, like, you're being asked to be your own self-promoter, and so that's also not equitable in some way. Okay.
Yeah, there's real concerns too, that then those researchers also can't access then the peer-reviewed research. So if we're really focusing all on preprints, then that, assuming that most of that will then end up getting published somewhere, then we're locking out, researchers globally from accessing kind of the reviewed part, which I think is an interesting concern. And, we are, looking at what can we do and reinvest in that'll help alleviate some of these issues over the next few years. But I still feel strongly that this has to be the route that we take, because keeping the status quo seems to me more harmful than going through the pain points of trying to come to something better on the other side. And talking about libraries, I come around to just really wanting the libraries to cancel big deals, and cancel these subscriptions, and we rely on kind of half measures to provide access. I think we've now focused on the APC crisis, which is great, and it should have a spotlight, but I don't think the serials crisis was ever solved. I feel like everyone stopped talking about it. Meanwhile, the
So
system's
do you feel
paying
like
twice for
it
everything.
seems like we've sort of hit a ceiling, right? Where there is like, and I think there's some actually real meaningful structural reasons for this, but it's like I think what are we at? It's about 50 to 70% of articles are OA.
Yeah, I think it's still under 70.
Okay, so
I think 64% was the last number I saw.
Okay. I don't have an answer, so I'm just going to lob this over to you and you can react to it. One of the really important things that I've learned in the past year or two was I'm on the STEM side, so I was a neuroscientist for a long, so I was always very much like basic science. So basically, in settings where labs had big grants, lots of money, and APCs were, not ideal, but it was like whatever, like you're spending $10,000 on a reagent to do one experiment on a Sunday, so like whatever, like just pay the APC.
Yeah.
Talking more with people on the social sciences side, the liberal arts side, even like a $2,000 or a $3,000 APC is just a non-negotiable, non-starter. Like I cannot pull that money out of a hat to pay that APC. And so I wonder if, and a lot of like again heated exchanges on Twitter, kind of for me to slowly kind of like really wrap my head around this is, like just like needing more of a path forward, I think some of these journals were just like our constituency they're just not going to pay APCs, and so just sort of like deer in the headlights, not sure what to do. Like we don't want to be the bad guys, but we also don't like that is not a stepping stone where we can step to the next thing. And so I don't know, and I don't have an answer for that. I'm now kind of sensitive to that, and I don't know.
I have a lot of thoughts around that.
Yeah,
though.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, and I think that's what I wish we had more conversations like this in the space, because I think there's a real hesitancy to just be honest about where we are.
Yeah, I need next steps. Like this is just a logistical thing.
Exactly, but we're talking about different publishers here. Like I think you're talking about like small society focused really are a value add journal that subscription models may have only really worked for where and then a lot of what I'm often talking about is large for-profit publishers. I mean, most of our $7 million per year, because we fund a lot of science, global development, art, agriculture. We're not a lot of STEM and humanities at the foundation. So $7 million is going to all the top 5 publishers every year for profit. So we really have to look at where our grantees are publishing now, and I'm hoping that our future policies affect that. But for the publishers that you're talking about, there are a lot of interesting things happening right now. I mean, we're seeing the Subscribe to Open, I think, has actually taken off and been quite successful in a short amount of time. So that's a community that I've been, trying to follow closely as they make developments. There's some good stuff happening there.
Yeah, I really like Subscribe to Open. Yeah. It's like an interesting, stepping stone. Yeah, I love that. It's
like one of the easiest, cheapest, most actually ethical ways to get to open access more quickly for a publisher. There's more switching to, Diamond model, and those discussions are deepening and really taking off. And I think one of the problems that we have in these conversations is, let's see, how do I articulate this? There are a lot of journals out there that do have good operating models. Like, everyone points to, okay, DOAJ has, thousands of journals in these topics but they're not the ones that people are reading necessarily or are considered more prestigious. So then people don't view them as valuable enough to actually support them and submit and publish the research there. And I think that's a real problem. And that's when you need more researcher involvement of like, if you value these things, then you have to like walk the talk and don't, submit to where you've always submitted in a for-profit publisher because that's what you think is necessary.
Just to go back for a few little random things that you mentioned. So just a couple of things that I always like to think about. Let's do the Diamond one first. So can you? I kind of haven't been fully keeping up with all of the. I love Diamond open access. That's sort of like one of my core kind of principles is like just starting from a place of like don't pay to publish, don't pay to read, and just like how can we move forward? And it's hard to think through the business models there, but that's kind of, if I take that away, then I lose my fire for wanting to move forward with whatever the product of platform is. And so that's just something that but I've always had kind of a disconnect with, I think, other people that are interested in Diamond Open Access and call themselves Diamond Open Access. I've been very focused on like, how can I create products and platforms where you're still generating a revenue stream, but it's like you're not violating your core principles. I think so, but I'd be curious to hear what you've been seeing happening in that space. I think when I last really connected in with it, it basically what that meant is like a university was paying for everything, and so they just like didn't have to worry about a business model or revenue streams or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, that can be parts of it. I think we're seeing more of, journals stepping away from having kind of a for-profit overlord running the journals. Because, again, going back to journals aren't real, what is really there? And it's, there are editors and volunteers and peer reviewers. That's all, like, gifted from the academic community to these journals for the good of the academic community at low cost to the publishing function. So I think it's, I would embolden editorial boards to, see that and value that more and the power of that, because I think it makes it easier to walk away. And there's so many tools nowadays that you can plug into at low cost to produce a journal and articles, because it really is the people in the community that matters the most. But then the hard part then is, you lose your impact factor, you lose your indexing, and then trying to build that back up, I think, is a big barrier. And there are, libraries are trying to, I think, so not necessarily like institution presses paying for kind of the diamond model, more of library budgets being redirected, and there are groups. And don't ask what the acronyms stand for, but SCOS and I know Lyrasis are both great advocacy groups that help kind of pull those funds from funders and libraries, primarily libraries, and distribute that so that journals can be free to publish, free to read. I mean, there's over $1 billion in this system, so like,
and in a weird
getting
sense,
it to move.
like, it's all kind of like blends a little bit. Like, subscribe to open, it's like, are they subscribing or are they like philanthropy? Like, are they like patrons? Like, the kind of the lines blur a little bit, and like, but the goal is like from the researcher's perspective, being able to freely contribute and freely read, and so like however you can get there. There's probably going to be a couple different models to get there. This is another just random thing that I think about a lot, because I've been on both like the university academic side, I've been on like for-profit side, and this is something I struggle with, is like, do you feel like nonprofit and for-profit really cleanly dissect? And maybe we shouldn't even go there, but like, no. I think we need to have more honest conversations, because I don't think we'll get anywhere if we don't have these conversations. And this is something that throughout my, open access journey that I've really wavered on, and I go from like, it's got to be, not for profit or nothing else, to, we have examples where not for profits aren't great actors in this space, and maybe it's more mission driven, or I always try to be very transparent that we've had a long-standing partnership with F1000 that's always been a for-profit, and that's a great partnership, and we do great things with that work. But now I'm kind of more back on the not for profit again, because it's so hard to see, but then there's no real sustainable, we don't have a lot of great examples of sustainable open access models that have worked over time, that haven't relied heavily on grant funding that could be quite precarious. But at the same time, when it's a for-profit entity, they run differently, and there's different incentives and motives, and we see the big for-profit publishers gobble everything up. They're trying to churn out more papers. So it's a tough one, and I go back and forth, but today I'm leaning more on the not. I think it might also be different at scale, right? Like, I think once you're operating at scale, like the for-profit like incentives, like it's a totally different world. So I most of my experience has been in the startup world. So it's like basically, like there's like so little difference between for-profit. Like nobody's making money. Everybody's just trying to like get attention. Like, like we're just these little tiny squeaking mice. Like, but yeah, it's been an interesting discussion in my own head, because it's sort of jarring, right? Because I came from science, right? And so like a lot of my, like, I had this like built-in like default like aversion to for-profit stuff, because like a lot of it was like, oh, this lab got paid money by this pharmaceutical and like and so like I came from this very like kind of had like a chip on my shoulder, like anti. And when I started moving into like leaving science, being like, okay, I want to do like something like building technology in this space, just like, I wanted to be able to work with engineers, and I wanted to be able to like actually build stuff and like think through like, how do you build this? What do you build? And it was sort of, I very quickly and in a jarring fashion got ripped over to the other side, the for-profit side, because all of the interesting conversations I was having around how do I build a diamond open access platform were on the for-profit side. Because like you would talk with people who had started companies where the content was just free to produce and free to read. It was like, well, duh, like why the fuck would you charge $1 to post on Facebook? That makes no sense. And so, and it was very bizarre for me because like all of the really deep conversations I was having were from like either like little investors or people who had like started companies. And so it was very bizarre for me. And so, but I do think there's this element of scale, right? Like I think maybe the for-profit, nonprofit is less meaningful at like the startup scale. But then once it's like you get acquired and you do see this, like a startup gets acquired and then it just gets folded into like the evil empire,
Yeah, and either that helps them flourish or then they just are starved.
Yeah.
Do you think there are any business models or kind of business ideas that academic publishing hasn't tested yet or tried?
I don't know. I mean, I do not have a lot of success in this realm. So my thought, and I basically failed on this, but I'm still.
Well, hey, knowing what doesn't work is also helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the basic. I would describe my basic philosophy on this: aspirational and optimistic, delusionally optimistic. Maybe is at this point is just don't charge to publish and don't charge to read, and then just use that as a foundation for building community or building whatever. And then maybe there's additional services that don't directly interfere with that core academic interaction that you can then charge for. And so, or maybe it's just a thing where it's like this sort of like blurred, like soft kind of like paying for it, where it's like subscribe to open. Or one idea that I've kind of been thinking about a lot recently is just like optional fees. So basically like everything is free, but like maybe you put like a little like star or a little like band on it and stuff. So like basically either a funder or the researchers at the university can come in and like basically sponsor, but it's totally optional. It's kind of like the band that just like released their album for free, but then it's like, hey, if you like it, like give us money. And then you just basically self-filter out for people who can and can't pay. There's probably some issues with that as well, like creating second-class citizens and stuff like that, but that was another idea.
No, I mean, but I think that's at least much more equitable. And when you think about, APCs, I don't see APCs anymore as paying for a service, because you're basically just paying to release the article from copyright
from jail,
and a paywall. Because you're not getting anything different than if that article had been paywalled. And it's fascinating that when we reject payments for hybrid journals, what ends up happening at that point? It's like, will the publisher then put the paper behind a paywall? Will they then like hound the authors for money forever? Or, we've seen some cases where they end up retracting it because an APC can't be paid, which is just not
and again,
a good place to be.
So like that used to drive me insane. But now I'm in this new chilled out, like where it's like, okay, that is a promotional service that they're retracting. Like and again, it's a little bit premature because we're not quite there yet. But like, I think if we all start committing to like, the preprint was the paper, and all this other shit is the promotion. It's the magazine. It's the bookstore. And I know we're not there yet, but if we all like start committing to that, then I think it's like, okay, like whatever. That was like some like promotional deal that got canceled. But it's hard because it's like we're not there yet, and so like they really are still like influencing like what is in the library, like what is like available to people. So it's like, but I'm trying my best to like not let that trigger me.
Smart. It's good because I mean I've never worked in a space that can be so aggravating. I mean my biggest pet peeve right now is article types. Like we keep running into issues where people really, grantees and even our own employees really want to publish open access. They get invited to write a think piece, and then at the end, they end up trying to share it, and it has a paywall, and then the publisher's like, oh, we're so sorry, not that article type. We can't do open access for that article type. And I'm like, you couldn't have let them know in the beginning. And my big wish would be that
I actually didn't know about that. So that's like an OA journal that then paywalls types of content.
It's mostly hybrid journals.
Okay,
I mean, but BMJ is one where they do paywall their what they call more their front end stuff, but original research is not paywalled, which is an interesting model to be able to support the activities of the journal. But I think hybrid journals would need to be much more forthright about that, because it seems like the authors have no idea what's going to be the end result of whether or not it'll be accessible or not, and then authors just don't really care about article types, so it's the publisher putting these restrictions, which are not often written down anywhere, and they all use different terms. Like the one I'm dealing with right now is called a worldview. I mean, come on, like, okay, because it's a worldview, they won't allow open access.
Yeah, that's actually a really standard business practice of like arbitrarily creating products so that you can then build a pricing model on top of it. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it.
They're just like, hey, like, it's like I think the famous example is like the telephone lines where calling distance didn't really, like, from the infrastructure standpoint, matter that much versus calling locally, but they just like created the concept of local and distance calls so they could then charge for it. Anyway. One thing you mentioned a while back that I just wanted to plant a seed on is you said like the for-profit overlords, and I that's something I've also been thinking about a lot. It's the same concept of like startup, good intentions, then gets acquired and folded into like whatever. I really love the concept, and this is we won't get into any Web3 stuff, but this comes directly from the Web3 community. Is this concept of kind of community ownership of a thing, of an organization, and so I really love the concept of separating somebody who's helping a community start a journal from that parent thing, right? And so like this is probably a whole separate conversation around DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, but with my own projects in the work, like where I'm going is having the parent thing help set this thing up, but then on a deep technical level, having that community own the organization, have control over the content, and so like. It's a really wonderful little concept that comes out of the Web3 world that maybe we could have a separate conversation
Has anyone really introduced that to academics before?
No, we're still in the phase where, and I've experienced this a lot, is if you talk about anything that has to do with Web3 or blockchain to most people in academia, they just immediately think of a giant, like, masturbating monkey that got sold for $10,000. Like, that's where we're at. And fair enough, like, it's like a lot of scams, and so if you don't take the time to find and network with the people that are like not making money, who are just like the artists, the academic, whatever, like there's a lot of really good stuff happening, but it's overshadowed by a lot of like scammy stuff happening. And so so I would don't like discount everything, but it's definitely still not mature yet. So it's like sort of mature. Like you have a lot of like nerds, like people who are like cryptography and like, you know, how to be
that's
like,
who I think
secure.
can change the world, you know. That's where I think the change will come from. But I say the kind of corporate overlord because I see
it happen.
In conversations I'm having, it's interesting that, you know, the editorial side of a journal may have no idea what's happening in the business side. And to me, that's weird because I've asked editors that, you know, because I'm trying to target editors more because I do think that they care deeply about having the research published there and disseminated as broadly as possible. So, you know, when, say, Elsevier isn't allowing a rights retention strategy to happen, I'm asking the editors, hey, do you know that this is happening? And I was like, okay, well, how much, you know, does Elsevier hosting your journal, how much money do you get back for that? And they don't know. And then so... That is
brilliant, because they're clearly on the academic side, but have also, like, decided to take on this leadership role for the journal. So they're, like, in that world already. Yeah, that's a really, I like that.
Often, you know, volunteer to the journal, but they don't know anything really about the financial side of it, and I think, you know, from the Elsevier perspective, that's probably a little bit by design. So you're not looking, you know, behind the curtain. I wish researchers and editors had those conversations more and really understood what it means to have those business models, because I think that's where we're seeing those editorial boards walk away from those relationships.
Okay, there's a lot on the table here. I'm trying to think what would be next to go into. I
would be curious if you think that, I mean, we're talking about like a rise in preprints and going towards preprints, if that's feeding the mis and disinformation machine.
Preprint specifically, or just the idea that there's more content with less of a threshold?
Just preprints. So the idea that things are being published without peer review.
Oh, okay. I think I need to get caught up on some of the rigorous studies on this, but I still just reflexively have this sunshine is the best disinfectant. Like, I think that okay, there's also different categories. If a preprint gets attention, like it's being talked about on Twitter, 100% I think that will kick a peer-reviewed journal's butt any day of the week. And we saw that with COVID, right? We saw that things that were getting discussed, like 100% people were finding out things, you could then correct it, post a new version, or people just all collectively agree, like, no, that's not correct.
Yes.
So I think that because basically that is the purest and most successful version of post-publication peer review against this like shadowy, private, whatever peer review. And so that like head-to-head, though, that's an easy win. I think the issue and the complicated challenge is with stuff that falls below the limelight, the attention, and so maybe nobody sees it, maybe a few people see it. So you can have an accumulation of real seeming pseudoscience-y stuff that's just like made it past like the preprint filters, but didn't really get engaged the community. And so, I don't know. I think that there is work to be done there. However, I don't think the bar is very high, because you see pseudoscience getting published in Elsevier journals, and it's pretty funny when you see those happen. It's like weird crystal telepathy, whatever. You're like, what is going on here?
Amulets, the amulets.
And so I do feel like it's a challenge, but I don't think it's necessarily specific to preprints. So I think it's bigger. It's more of a psychological issue there, because like even like journalists and like the people that have this concept of peer reviewed, and so there's this innate bias to think that something that's in a journal is somehow gone through some like high gauntlet. And I think especially with this, now journals are having a lot of trouble getting peer reviews. I think that the quality and that threshold is getting actively lowered on the journal side. And I think that as people become more comfortable with preprints, taking it seriously, you just have people that, at NIH you can now include preprints as like references. Like now that they're more like real, people are willing, I think, probably to engage with them, talk about them, say this is right or this is not right, do that like real, active, dynamic, ongoing, fully open peer review. I think that they'll continue to improve, but I do feel like there is this like gap here, and I don't really know how to span the gap. This is probably going to take a long time to get to, but one thing that I would love to see us work towards is to actually across the board de-emphasize peer review, which is basically like informal discussion of a thing, which does catch some stuff, but it doesn't catch the deep stuff. It doesn't catch the like a researcher wanting to build on top of that paper and then going in, opening up the methods, making sure that like all the methods are there, all the data is there, and trying to replicate it. And so it's going to be really hard to get there because it costs a lot of money to replicate things.
It does.
But I do feel like if we like, maybe not de-emphasize, but are just a little bit more honest about like how effective peer review is, and then at least aspire towards replications. And so maybe we just like perceive all articles as like, okay, this is maybe true, it might not be true, and we're really not going to know. We're really not going to have that level of peer review that like it's something we can now build up on until it's replicated in some way. And so, that's kind of where my mind is at. But that's a mix of like actual issues and perceived psychological issues. Like the branding around peer review is very strong. But I know bioRxiv and medRxiv, they're trying to build this like constellation of open review. So I'm really excited by that. And my goal, like what would be really awesome is if on a journal, you had sort of like the equivalent of preprint, so it's like out there but hasn't undergone some peer review, and then you can maybe have like a peer reviewed status, and then you also had a replicated status. That would be my ideal, so that you could just consume the content appropriately, basically. Yeah. So I don't know, but it's going to take a while to get there, probably.
If anything in the space, yes. But I'm glad to see that we're our thinking's pretty aligned.
Would you agree with how I kind of categorized it? Or?
Yeah. And one thing I've been talking more about, and because we are hearing, as we shift our policy of like, what that means, it's interesting to see some people frame it as like, well, now you're going to endorse unverified information being out there, and I'm like, well, no, that's not what's happening. And I think too, our open access policies are being asked to do too much heavy lifting to solve problems that are a wider systemic issue. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the issues of kind of equity and the issues of mis and disinformation, like that's broader and bigger than an open access policy.
Yeah.
And so I try to kind of push back on some of those concerns of like where they're valid concerns, like an open access policy can't solve for that. But if we want to solve those problems, then we have to have the bigger, deeper conversations that solve those problems. So, if we're trying to address is that publishing, it's too late.
Yeah, there's also institutionalized disinformation and misinformation on the university side. Like, when you think of, like, people that establish their career creating, like, a theory or an ideology, and then they're now the elders, and they're, like, trying to keep their legacy going. Like, there's all sorts of insane stories of, like, younger faculty having to like bend over backwards to interpret their results to like not offend the elders, and it's like that is misinformation, right? Like the fact that they could just go and preprint what they really truly believe is actually going on with their data, that's a huge outlet for like correcting misinformation and stuff. And you get the good with the bad with the good or whatever, but it cuts both ways for sure. And so
No, it's interesting to see. We spent last week in Long Beach, Washington, and I love that all the signage is like world's longest beach, and I was like, is that true? And I start Googling it, and it's like, it's not wrong, but it's also not true. And it's like, man, you just, you encounter these things, and that's why I separate, information literacy programs. There's lots of growing researchers and institutions around mis and disinformation. I do think it's a lot of the role of libraries to play to solve for that. Again, open access policy is not going to be the solve.
Okay, so there were a few other things I wanted to try to get to. Do you have to leave right at 10:30, or can you go a little bit over?
I can't. I do have another.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's try to get through some of these things, and maybe maybe we're setting ourselves up for a second chat, which is also fun. Okay, so I mean I could vent and talk about all these things all day, but if we try to take a deep breath and try to kind of float above it all, and maybe even digging back into the start of your career as a librarian, and just really trying to float above the noise, thinking more long term, distilling stuff into a fine whiskey or whatever your drink of choice is. What are your kind of like transcendent thoughts on like what is a library? Like when you are like wanting to disconnect and be like, why the fuck am I even doing all this? Like what is this thing that we're wrestling with? Like what do you have any thoughts on that? Like what? And it doesn't even need to be digital, physical, whatever, like, but just like society, like what is this library thing that we're trying to like do here?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I mean, one, I believe, is, unfettered access to knowledge. So that's kind of the first. And then the second would be that more community hub and whatever that might mean. That's where I'm thinking of like the job aid resources, the things that we see libraries lending out now that aren't traditional books and objects, like ties and tools and whatever somebody might need but might not have access to. I think that's really critical for the foundation of our society and hopefully keeping democracy alive. But we'll see.
Okay, so taking one step kind of deeper or more like kind of like short term, like I wrestle with this concept of like what a digital library is. So like I think we could probably get quite a bit of consensus around like what a library is. I mean, I think everyone has their own definition of it, but then there's this like once you step into this like, okay, well, what should a library look like based on current technology and like based on how people are going to be accessing information now and in the future. Like we're not really going back to like, well, I don't know. Actually, maybe some people might dispute the idea of like going back to reading physical stuff. There is a place for that, but in terms of like, what information is going to exist in 100, 500, 1,000 years? Like historians and scientists in 1,000 years, like what is the content they're going to be accessing, and like what does a library mean in that context, and like so maybe let's start with that. It's like what is your ideal version of that? Like what does that look like?
Well, ideally we would have digital access. It's a lot less siloed, and a lot less controlled by, I think, copyright maybe is the word I'm looking for, or at least I'm looking at like the ebook crisis, and like I'm looking at the fact that I read everything now on my Kindle primarily. It works well for me, and so that's my preferred mode. But then I'm on hold for electronic versions of books that I have to wait 6 months for because they're really popular, and I'm like, why can't I just download another copy? Whereas at least with the physical book, and there's a certain amount of ownership libraries have in that when they purchase it, whereas really what libraries are being pushed by vendors to be more of are just not ownership but lending, I guess is what I would say more. So it's almost like instead of owning it to lend it to the community, they're lending it themselves to lend then to the community, and that's problematic as we try to protect access. And you see kind of the lawsuits happening around ebooks and what happened around controlled digital lending during the pandemic, where physical libraries were closed and trying to put electronic copies online and then being sued over copyright.
Oh geez, I missed that whole story. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating to look into, and
that's funny because it's such a clear. It throws this exact question in your face. It's like, because the pandemic closed the physical library, so like
yeah, and the libraries had already paid for those physical copies, but then we're forced to pay again to have more digital access. And I always say I didn't become a librarian to protect the copyright of publishers. It's a little different, I think, when you're talking about public libraries, where it's a lot of books and information where the authors are paid for the writing, like, versus academic that they're creating the content themselves. So it is a bit different. But at the same time, I think it's important to have actual ownership that has a clear delineation of like, okay, we've paid for it, now we own it. Whereas like I don't like purchasing digital items myself, because most in terms and conditions they could disappear and you have no recourse. Yeah.
I do think that's an important distinction of the like, because sometimes libraries are pulling in like not necessarily entertainment, but it's like non-scholarly works, right? It's like novels that are important for cultural whatever, and so but there's a little bit more of a gray line where there's an author where their whole living is based off of getting paid for that. But then when you move over to the scholarship, it's a lot easier to have the ethical discussions, because the authors are not, I mean, they're getting paid by grants, right? So there's just some weird company, corporate, blah, blah, blah thing. What was I going to say? What I was going to say was this is one of the things that really haunts me, is knowing that most of the technology and tooling that has been built over the last couple of decades by publishers is how to restrict access to a thing, right? So authors are, there's the whole procedure, blah, blah, blah stuff, but like this formal channel of communicating is going into this system where it has not, like the internet built a way to broadly disseminate something immediately, broadly, rapidly, and they had to, on top of that, build a structure to crush that. And that is like crazy, because it's just like really depressing thinking about how many like engineering hours and just the whole everything that was the time spent to build something to go away from what a library is, right? It's like and it really started thinking about this with like the oopsie paywalls, which is like you pay for OA and then like
we still track those down.
Do you have? I would love to know how often that happens. Like
I can pull the data. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Like,
it's not a large amount, but it's still, to me, concerning that it happens at all, and I'd say maybe 5 to 10% of what we publish each year.
5 to 10% experiences an oopsie paywall at some point.
I shouldn't just throw numbers out there. I could definitely look.
But it still happens.
Definitely look.
Because my experience was just anecdotally, like somebody liked posting about it, but like the fact that it happened, even if it just happens once, it's just this like. It kind of hits you in the gut a little bit, where it's like, okay, like, not only do we pay $10,000 to make this open access, it's like this whole machine, this whole technological machine that is designed to crush people, the dissemination of that work just accidentally falls on that. It's like, oh my God, like what? For me, it just hit me in the gut. It was like, what the hell is this whole fucking thing?
I want to know, like, how much does it cost publishers to sustain that every year? So you have to sustain the paywall, you have to sustain the IP proxy access for subscribers to get around that paywall. You have to support the whole sales staff to sell that, of getting around the paywall. Like, how much does that cost?
Yeah.
Which has got to be a lot. And then I don't even want to tell you, like, the nightmare that is trying to pay publisher APCs, because, you know, this is not the major journals were born a subscription model, and none of their systems have transitioned to open access and APCs very well. We waste a lot of time and energy just trying to figure out if we for sure funded that article and how to pay it, and we ask for minimal information from a lot of these systems, and it's a heavy lift. So that's why I'm excited to get away from that as well, because it's added strain on the system that doesn't add value to anything. Yeah,
and honestly, the Diamond Open Access, for me, it's an alignment of both an ethical principle, but also an engineering principle, where it's like, just don't even worry about that, right? And then you can then build on top of that. It's like a system where you just don't have to worry about, from an engineering perspective, regardless of business model, where you don't have to worry about that. It just aligns with like what the product actually is, right? Like the product is supposed to be dissemination. Like that's the whole, like these authors are creating this content for free, and a lot of times they're editing it and previewing it and curating it. And the whole point of them coming to you is tell the world about this. Like that's the whole point, right? And so if you and I know the business models haven't been proven or whatever, but just from like a fundamental like core product design perspective, just makes a lot of sense to like not charge for those things, because the whole point is to broadly disseminate it, you know? So I don't know. It gets me going a little bit.
And there are cheaper systems now and more efficient systems. Like I can't believe some of the systems that journals still use, because it's such a pricey and technologically heavy lift to switch.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that's not an excuse anymore.
Yeah.
Where's the innovation? I mean, it's so hard to see any innovation to me. And I know, you know, last time I brought that up at a publisher conference, I got a lot of pushback.
Really?
Which is good. I welcome it, but I don't know. Innovation to me needs to be happening at a much larger scale if we're going to solve some of these pressing world issues, and not still like trying to come up with, you know, citations or reference styles or, you know.
Yeah. There's, it's an interesting, it's a very different set of user experience kind of challenges. It's just like there's just a lot of history and a lot of like legacy with like the way things have been done, and that has a lot of momentum kind of going forward. So you can't just like whip up a new UX and people jump onto it. It's like it's sort of a slow process of transitioning. So maybe some final thoughts here. Like, what is just based on your kind of accumulation of all your pet peeves and things, like what would you say to like a researcher or a librarian or whoever in this space, like what are kind of some concrete steps that somebody could do today to like kind of step towards your vision of what you want?
For research, I definitely think it's asking questions up front in the journal publishing process and being much more aware of the ramifications of their actions. So I see so many times that researchers don't really know or understand what a copyright transfer agreement means, what it means to sign over copyright, that, you know, I'm surprised to see the issues that crop up at acceptance or post publication, where they are suddenly faced with fees or, you know, paywalls that they didn't expect. And it's like, this information, you know, you need to ask for these things up front. Just don't assume. So I think that would really help, and, you know, realizing the value of their work and not just giving it away so freely, I think is important for researchers. And I think kind of the same to librarians as well. Like I'm constantly haunted by the amount of effort and work librarians give to these vendors and these for-profit companies, especially, to improve their products and get users and get access. And I'm like, so I think really trying to find opportunities in budgets or conversations to really push the boundaries of like, why are we supporting this vendor or access, and being a little more comfortable, I think, in conflict. Like, I've been doing the open access policy work for so long now. I'm so comfortable with conflict. Of like, I get you want to publish there, but you know, that's not compliant, and we're not valuing that, you know, publication journal as much as has been in the past, because things are changing. We value the research and having to be really comfortable. And I think libraries, you know, are shifting towards leading more with their values as well, and wanting to find mission aligned partners that they're not so easily like, we'll give millions of dollars to Elsevier. So I think those shifts need to continue to happen, and I think libraries need to feel like they're not alone in those discussions and making those hard pushes.
Because one of the things that happens is sometimes, you know, I don't know how pervasive this is, but a lot of times universities can be weirdly aligned with, like, the higher up universities, like outside the library, can be more aligned with the for-profit publishers, because they're going after like prestige and all this stuff as well. And so
the rankings, they want to rank high.
The rankings, and so that was another thing that I kind of really started to internalize recently. It's just like, it's not just like researchers and universities are not together. It's like there's researchers, there's universities, there's libraries, there's the publishers, there's the funding. You know, it's like,
And the publishers are the ones that benefit completely from the kind of the chaos of this setup and system, and that's why too, you know, people really want funders to pay for open access, and you know, I think really the access should be the library's purview, because now we are adding and continually adding multiple revenue streams that we don't really know who's paying for what and how much. Like, I have no idea, especially with the larger publishers. You know, we'll see articles come in and it's like NIH, Wellcome Trust, Gates Foundation, and I'm like, well, why are we picking up the bill? Like, if there's no clear process, and I think that opaqueness means that the publishers can, you know, really pick and choose and get away with things that we aren't even aware of.
And I mean, this will probably take a while, but like, as the library community kind of like finds its voice and starts being more like hardcore and badass, I mean, if you now have a system that kind of reverts back to where like librarians are really controlling like library, like access to it, and really having control over that data, like, I think a lot of those, like, the budgets, like, can go down in terms of, like how much they're needing to spend on bringing the content in, right? If it's flowing into a global infrastructure, then there's a lot more power, right? And then they can spend their budget on improving that and improving services and stuff. But, you know, it's been a while. I mean, I think basically just grappling with, like, you know, the internet and, like, this whole new, like, infrastructure, it's been a lot. But I do kind of see those inklings and, like, I'm just really curious to see how it all shakes out.
I think, especially in the next, you know, 5 to 10 years, which is probably what everyone says every 5 to 10 years, we'll see some really interesting shifts. Something has to give at some point, I like to believe. Or climate change will just take us all out.
We tried. Now we're just all underwater.
Hey, I'm joking, but like, I think, you know, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, it's gonna be one of the last inhabitable places.
My mom keeps telling me, move north, Nate. Like, San Diego's not gonna survive. So.
Not wrong.
Okay, well, this was super fun. Thanks for being my guinea pig.
Yeah, so great to catch up.
Always good to catch up. We'll see where this goes. I'm gonna try to do a couple of these and then see if anybody gives a shit about us talking about this stuff. And if they do, we'll keep doing it.